Alex Benson, Beacon. Benson was one of the most physically gifted all-around athletes in the section this season. A transfer back from Kennedy Catholic, he assumed a leadership role with the Bulldogs and scored touchdowns as a passer, runner, receiver, return man, and on defense. He finished with over 1,200 combined yards and was the offensive MVP in the exceptional senior all-star game. Connor Dignan, Brewster. You can't run for all those yards that Brewster had this season without a few big bodies moving piles up front. That's where Dignan came in. A 3-year varsity starter on both sides of the ball, he was arguably the most complete lineman in Class A this season. Brewster ran 70% of his offense behind Dignan, who also had a pair of sacks on defense. Jackson RIEGER, John J. Cross River. The explosive downfield threat continued to burn defenses this season in the Indians' high-octane offense. RIEGER caught 21 passes and scored 4 touchdowns, 3 of which came in a win over Tappan Zee. RIEGER had 57 catches in the last 2 seasons and nearly 900 yards. A standout athlete, he recently signed a letter of intent to play lacrosse at Binghamton. TJ Lavelle, Rye. Lavelle continued a long legacy of talented Rye quarterbacks. In 2 years as a starter, he threw for over 3,500 yards and compiled a 15-3 record. As a senior, Lavelle was second in Section 1 with 1,637 yards passing and 17 touchdowns, completing 64% of his throws. And he had one of his best efforts of the year in Rye's win over rival Harrison, throwing for 275 yards and 3 scores. Nick Gargiulo, Somers. The longer the Tuskers played in the postseason, the better it seemed Gargiulo and the offensive line for Somers performed. In his second season starting on both sides of the line, Gargiulo came into his own as a pass protector and opened a considerable number of those holes you saw on the Horn and Pirates highlight reels. Defensively, he had 77 tackles, 8 for loss, and recovered 3 fumbles. Brett Makar, Yorktown. No player made a bigger and quicker impact on Section 1 this season than Makar. One of the area's elite lacrosse talents, he had 9 tackles, 3 sacks, 208 yards rushing, and 3 touchdowns in the Huskers' season-opening win over John Jay. And he took off from there. He carried the team unbeaten to the Section 1 championship game and finished the year with 52 tackles, 8 sacks, an interception, and rushed for 1,270 yards, 16 touchdowns, plus 314 yards receiving, and 5 more scores. Austin Evans, Harrison. Evans was already a 2-year starter for the Huskies and is coming off a season where he led the team in rushing, touchdowns, and sacks, while also handling kicking duties. Evans ran for 584 yards and 8 touchdowns in 8 games, averaging 5.4 yards per carry. But he really made his mark on defense, coming up with 72 tackles, 6 sacks, and an interception. Sean Makar, Lakeland. Makar carried as heavy a load as any player in the section this season, lining up pretty much everywhere on offense. He led the Hornets with 825 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns, while also spending time at quarterback and wide receiver. He had a career effort in a narrow win over Nyack, rushing for 225 yards and 2 touchdowns, and closed the season with 38 tackles defensively. Eric Hagenow, Somers. The bookend talents on the offensive line of Nick Gargiulo and Eric Hagenow paved the way for an exhilarating offense that was good enough to win a state championship. Somers ran for nearly 4,000 yards on the ground this season, which was a testament to the piles that Hagenow and company moved week after week. Hagenow had 85 tackles on defense and came out with 2 sacks in the state championship game. Dominick CIOFFI, Yorktown. CIOFFI is one of the more unheralded stars in this Yorktown team. A 3-year starter, he's been at the forefront of his team defensively, locking down the safety spot and made a name for himself in Yorktown's run to the section finals. CIOFFI averaged 50 tackles in his 3 seasons and scored 5 touchdowns with 2 interceptions as a senior. Nick Leahy, Brewster. Leahy was another veteran 3-year starter on an offensive line at Brewster that ranked amongst the best in Section 1. He started the past 2 years on defense, where he established himself among the area's top run stuffers. He finished the season with 48 tackles, 3 sacks, and 2 fumble recoveries for a Brewster team that went unbeaten until the Section 1 Class A semifinals. Ryan Bloom, Eastchester. Bloom emerged this fall as a dynamic two-way player who made history this fall at Eastchester. He had 4 sacks and recovered a fumble, which he returned for a touchdown. A 2-year starter, he rarely came off the field and caught 13 passes for 256 yards and 3 scores. Brett Egan, Rye.
Airs it out over the middle, and it's intercepted. Brett Egan with the INT.
Egan managed to be a big play threat as both a wide receiver and a safety in Rye's secondary. A 2-year, two-way starter, he had over 600 total yards and came up with 4 interceptions on defense. Egan was named the Chris Mello Award recipient and helped Rye reach the Section 1 Class A semifinals with 2 interceptions in a quarterfinal win over John Jay. Justin Cavallo, Yorktown. One of the best linebackers to come through Yorktown in the past decade, Cavallo was a tone setter in the middle of a physical Huskers unit. Cavallo had 67 tackles and finished his career with 140 in 23 games. He also had 3 sacks and ran for 5 touchdowns as a senior. Cavallo will continue his career at the University of Albany. Joe Scaglione, Our Lady of Lourdes. Scaglione overcame a broken arm in the preseason to carry the Warriors back to the Class A quarterfinals. He ran for a team-best 957 yards and 12 touchdowns in only 6 games, averaging 7.1 yards per carry. Defensively, he made 49 tackles and will enter next season among the area's elite two-way players in the Hudson Valley. Antonio Vieira, Somers. For all the talent that the Class A state champions had on their roster, you can make a case that Vieira was as valuable as anybody in the postseason. The middle linebacker took his game to a different level in the playoffs, which started with a 23-tackle effort against Brewster before making 30 in 3 state tournament contests. He finished with 103 tackles and a pair of interceptions to lead a defense that dominated in the postseason. Tazon Barrett, Walter Panis. Barrett switched positions this fall, going from defensive tackle to linebacker, and his athleticism allowed him to be one of the area's best. And get this, Barrett lost over 100 pounds during his varsity career. He led the Panthers in tackles and sacks, and was as punishing a runner as he was a defender. 2016 might just be the beginning for Barrett, who hopes to continue his career in college. James McKiernan, Pearl River. McKiernan was the epitome of a workhorse for the Pirates, rarely coming off the field, if ever, in his second year as a two-way starter. He was second on the team with 657 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns, and averaged 8.5 yards per carry. He also had 258 yards receiving and 3 scores, led the team in return yards, and intercepted 3 passes on defense while recording 55 tackles. Mike Lopez, Sleepy Hollow. On a team loaded with game breakers, Lopez stood among the rest. The senior two-way star ran for 847 yards and 7 touchdowns and had 176 yards receiving, leading Sleepy to a 5-4 record. Lopez had 47 tackles and a sack on defense, and is being actively recruited by Muhlenberg, Ithaca, Cortland, and St. John Fisher. Kevin Dennehy, Tappan Zee. Dennehy was a 3-year starter and a 2-year captain for the Dutchman, leading the team in tackles as a senior. He averaged 9.3 tackles per game at the Mike linebacker position. As the rugged, between-the-tackles runner, Dennehy was second on the team in rushing with 461 yards and 6 touchdowns on only 60 carries. Matt Bruno, Rye. Bruno earned a reputation during his 3-year career for being one of the most rugged and powerful defensive players in Section 1. Bruno finished with 51 tackles, 24 of which went for loss, and 8 sacks. He intercepted a pass, blocked 2 punts, and 1 field goal. Offensively, he caught 31 passes for 770 yards and 7 touchdowns. He'll continue his career at RPI. Nick Cunningham, Hendrick HUDSON. Cunningham fit the mold of a confident, gunslinging quarterback. The second-year starter broke out this fall and now holds almost every passing record in HenHud football history, 19 in all. He led Section 1 this season with 2,279 yards passing and 30 touchdowns in only 8 games. It was all highlighted by his unforgettable performance against Rye, where he threw for 362 yards, 5 touchdowns, and the game-winning 2-point conversion in the final minute to complete that epic comeback. Jose Boyer, Yorktown. Boyer won the starting quarterback job in the preseason 2 years ago and did nothing but win games and set records every day after that. He owns school records for career touchdowns and passing yards, eclipsing 4,000 total yards in his 2-year career. He threw for 1,251 yards this season and 869 yards on the ground, combining for 25 touchdowns as Yorktown reached the Section 1 title game. Boyer will play lacrosse at Notre Dame. Jack Guida, Brewster. Guida made the move from running back to quarterback almost look too easy this fall. He led the team in rushing for the 2nd year in a row, piling up 1,446 yards and 25 touchdowns, averaging 8 yards per carry for a Brewster team that won 8-1. He was also a capable passer, throwing for 827 yards and 7 scores, amassing 42 total touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. Matt Pyrus, Somers. As good as Somers was in the first half of the season, the Tuskers became a state championship contender when Pyrus hit his stride and earned more touches. The numbers are staggering: 873 yards receiving on 27 receptions, 13 of which went for touchdowns. He ran for 636 yards and 9 scores on a mere 35 attempts, averaging 18.2 yards per carry. He scored 11 touchdowns in his final 5 games, in what will go down as one of the greatest seasons in Section 1 history. Messiah Horn, Somers. The most hyped running back in the region entering this season, ended with the 3rd most yards in Section 1 history and the program's first state title. Horn will go down among the greats that ever came through Somers, rushing for 2,254 yards and 29 touchdowns, averaging 9.2 yards per carry. Horn's epic performance in the state semifinals, rushing for 221 yards and 3 touchdowns on 4 carries in the 4th quarter alone, was the performance of the year.